Good evening. The July 3rd, 2024 special meeting of the Mentor Exempted Village Board of Education is called to order. This meeting is being held in accordance with Section 3313.15 of the Ohio Revised Code. Please place your mobile phones on silent mode for the meeting. Mr. Wade, please call the roll.
Ms. Iapolo.
Here.
Ms. Jessling.
Present.
Ms. Marchaza.
Present.
Ms. Payne.
Here.
Ms. Cook.
Here. Thank you, and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, the first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes.
Is this for both our,
Let's do them separate, I suppose. The June 6th regular board meeting, do I have a motion?
so moved? Second?
Any discussion?
I think based on what we had emailed to us, there was only one correction. For John Sanford, did we take out his occupation?
Yeah, it was my recommendation, Madam President, members of the board, after getting the information from legal counsel to adjust Mr. Rodriguez to read shared concerns against the, so against that would be added in regarding, and add an apostrophe S to board's decisions pertaining to the books of transgender students. And then on Mr. Sanford, for consistency purposes, shared, he is a licensed therapist and should be struck. And then it would read, caution the community, adding in of taking the position, striking to be against DEI and SE to clarify what he was stating.
So we would need a motion to do that? Is that, or are we all? Yes, I don't.
Do we need to vote on that change? I thought that was something we already discussed.
If everybody's in agreement, I don't see a need to discuss it further or to adjust it.
We can just vote on it then?
Yeah.
Okay.
And were there other, was there another change with, I thought there was another change.
Those were the only two that I emailed about that day.
Okay, any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Jessling.
Yes.
Ms. Marchaza.
Yes.
Ms. Iapolo.
Yes.
Ms. Payne.
Yes.
Ms. Cook.
Yes.
June 6th meeting minutes are approved 5-0 as amended.
Do I have a motion to approve the June 27th special board meeting minutes?
So moved? Second?
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Jessling.
Yes.
Ms. Marchaza.
Yes.
Ms. Iapolo.
Yes.
Ms. Payne.
Yes.
Ms. Cook.
Yes.
June 27th meeting minutes are approved 5-0.
Okay. Next, we have the Board of Education report and recommendations. And the first item under board business is the approval of a resolution authorizing an addendum to the contract of the superintendent.
So moved?
Do I have a second?
Second?
Any discussion?
I know, Mrs. Cook, I had spoken with you about this, but I wanted to see if we would be open to moving it to next week's meeting, the regular meeting. I just think that out of transparency, I heard from a lot of people about how they weren't very happy that we had even this meeting because it's the day before July 4th, and it was hard for a lot of people to come. So I think out of transparency, especially the last vote that we had in a special meeting was in regards to the contract that Mr. Heath received for 5 years. And we did receive some emails and feedback about how people wish that that had been at a regular meeting. So I would like to see if anybody would be okay with moving it to next week at the regular meeting.
I'm okay with that. I thought, I was under the impression we were doing that on the July 11th meeting anyways, not, well, at least bills. I wasn't under the impression we were doing Mr. Heath, so I would be fine with waiting.
It was my understanding that we were going to do it today if the documents were ready from legal, and then if it wasn't ready, then we would postpone it. But there was, since we had discussed all of these matters, which are executive session materials anyway, that we would do this today because we've gone over it multiple times.
So that was my recollection as well. It was either going to be the 3rd or the 11th. It was just a matter of when the documents could be prepared.
So I disagree. I don't remember any of that conversation happening. However, I just think for sake of transparency purposes, we should move it to next week. I don't understand what the hesitation is. Also, regular meetings, if we're going to start doing a lot of board business in special meetings, which we haven't really done before, we've pretty much used them as work sessions. But if we are going to start doing it, I would suggest and may propose down, in the future that we add public participation to our special meetings if we're going to start doing a lot of business in our special meetings instead of using them as like a work session. Also, the notification that we receive is very different for a regular meeting, and the public receives different notification for a regular meeting than special meetings. So special meetings, you only get 24 hours. We also only get 24 hours for an agenda item, or anything, to see the whole agenda, we get 24 hours. So regular meetings, we have, administrative guidelines that we receive that a week in advance, so we can prepare. Also, the public then gets it 3 days before the board meeting. And I think that's really important, especially when you're looking at, approving such things that mean a lot to the community. So I don't know, Mrs. Cook, could you explain why you decided to put it on this one and what your apprehension is, why you wouldn't support moving it to next week?
I don't see any reason that we would need to wait on this. This is something that has been discussed many times by the board, and I think we're all capable of making this decision at this time.
I think it's important to remember there's a reason why we have public participation, why the public receives an agenda item so they can see what it's upcoming and that so they can speak on something that means something to them. So, that should be the main reason why we try and do business at those regular meetings. So I don't see harm in waiting a week to show the public that, we value their right to speak.
Conversely, I don't see the harm in moving forward now. I think we have heard from the community, especially in regards to Mr. Heath's contract. We did have public comment when it was on the agenda. We did hear about his tenure, and we heard from folks via email as well. A lot of emails came in about, people's feelings about his work here in the district, and I would assume, that is related to whether or not he gets a performance bonus and a raise. I would also say that, prolonging this discussion, which I don't like prolonging discussions unless it's for an important reason, the more we have to potentially meet about this or consult legal over this, that means more taxpayer dollars spent. And I want us to be very keenly aware of when we're spending taxpayer dollars, and especially in light of, I'm looking at our legal expenses over the years from 2020, 21, 22, 3, 4, and from 21 to 22 alone, legal expenses increased by almost 20%. The following year was another 4.8% increase. So these are important things we need to consider when we're looking at additional meetings and prolonged discussions. And so things like that are what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about pushing votes out for reasons that aren't really clear to me.
I'll just add to that, because you made a couple of comments. This is the first time that the public is actually seeing the increase for next year for Mr. Heath. They didn't see it ever before that. So
The salary increase just...
Correct,
Okay.
yes. And so that's, not being transparent in my opinion, because normally we would have this done at a regular meeting. Also, you had mentioned that spending taxpayer dollars is important, that we stay cognizant of that. I completely agree, which is why I'm saying I think it should be moved to the regular meeting so that the public gets a chance to voice their opinion on how we're spending their taxpayer dollars. Also, legal fees. I agree that they have increased, rightfully so, because as we saw with the meeting minutes, things were going to be approved that legal didn't agree of, those opinions. So yes, we had to consult legal on several occasions. However, it's justified, and it's actually protecting us. There's somebody in Ohio that's suing a lot of boards right now over Open Meetings Act violations, a plethora of different violations. So yes, we have to spend a little more to stay, on point and make sure we're not doing anything that's could potentially get us into trouble, and that's in the respect to the tax dollars that we do spend. So.
I wouldn't necessarily agree that it's always justified. I think that we could be more careful when we're consulting legal and how we're doing so. That's all I'll say about that.
Is there any more discussion?
No.
Please call the roll.
Yeah.
Ms. Jessley?
Wait, are we doing this discussion for the superintendent contract right now? That was a quick move. I was just
Yes.
trying to see first if we could move it to next week. So I think we need discussion about the contract, if anybody has discussion on that.
Yeah, I have an issue that they're both on one resolution.
So this is the addendum. This is not, they're not both, that's not the one that they're both on. This is the resolution for Mr.
Correct.
Heath's raise for the next school year. That would give his contract, would name the salary for next school year.
And this is the one for Mr. Heath or for
For
Mr.
Mr.
Reed?
Heath.
Mr. Heath.
Any discussion on that? Okay, please call the roll.
Ms. Jessley?
Yes.
Ms. Marchaza?
Yes.
Ms. Iapolo?
No.
Ms. Payne?
No?
Ms. Cook?
Yes.
Motion carries 3-2.
The second item under board business is the approval of a resolution authorizing an addendum to the contract for Mr. Wade, for our CFO. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Any discussion?
I'll just echo what I said the first time around for Mr. Heath. I think that this should be moved to next week, although I realize I'm in the minority on that opinion. So just wanted to be consistent that I believe both of them should be moved to next week.
I second that sentiment.
Any more discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Jessley?
Yes.
Ms. Marchaza?
Yes.
Ms. Iapolo?
Yes.
Ms. Payne?
Yes.
Ms. Cook?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
It is recommended that the resolution authorizing the performance stipends to the superintendent and treasurer be approved.
So moved.
Second?
Any
have a-
discussion?
I would like to, I don't know if it needs to be a formal motion to divide the question, but we've done it in the past where if there are agenda items that are lumped in together, we'd like to separate them. So I don't know if anybody else would like it separated, so that we vote separate, just because we had separate discussions, and we're the only ones who do evaluate Bill and Craig, so I think they should be separate.
I agree.
Given the length of our discussions in executive session, I'm comfortable with voting on these as one resolution.
I just think too, when you're putting these two different people, two different jobs and two different evaluations on one, I don't understand, that could potentially put someone in an awkward position and either voting no for both, but they don't mean to, or voting yes for both. I don't see why. I mean, I understand lumping them in when we're talking about some of the other administrators, but those, we don't evaluate them. And even them, we're able to pull those aside if ever there was a, conflict of interest. So I'd like those separated too.
I know I had this question asked to me by a couple people, and I didn't want to violate sunshine answering two people. Were you able to answer that question for Mrs.
I
Iapolo?
sent it to Ms. Payne, I did not send it to anybody else.
Okay.
So I mean, I can share the reason why I had it drafted the way I did is because we do that with the other administrators. They're all on one, so just as a consistency of protocol.
Yeah. Which I get that with the other administrators because we don't evaluate them. We have two different separate evaluations for you than we do for Craig, and different write-ups and reviews and different goals. So I believe they should be separate. I did contact legal about it, and we can separate them if we so choose, so.
Any more discussion?
So we have,
I do not mind separating them. I'm not opposed to that, so.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
fine
you.
with me, but.
Do we have to postpone the vote if we separate them, or you just vote twice?
we would just vote twice.
We
yeah.
do not have to postpone the votes.
Okay.
So we have a motion to separate the vote by Mrs. Payne. Is there a second?
Second.
Any more discussion about separating the vote? Please call the roll.
So we're voting on the motion to separate, correct?
Yes.
Ms. Payne,
Yes.
Ms. Iapolo,
Yes.
Ms. Jessling,
No.
Ms. Marchaza,
No.
Ms. Cook.
Yes.
So now we have two resolutions.
All right, if we could start with Mr. Heath's. So a resolution authorizing a performance stipend for Mr. Heath.
So moved?
Second?
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Sorry, one second. Ms. Jessling,
Yes.
Ms. Marchaza,
Yes.
Ms. Iapolo,
No.
Ms. Payne,
No.
Ms. Cook.
Yes.
Motion carries 3-2.
A resolution authorizing a performance stipend for Mr. Wade.
So moved?
Second?
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Jessling,
Yes.
Ms. Marchaza,
Yes.
Ms. Iapolo,
Yes.
Ms. Payne,
Yes.
Ms. Cook.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, next we have discussion on board policy, and I'm going to let Mr. Heath address the policies that he wants to hit on here.
So I've shared 4 options regarding the 2520-9130 series with board members here several weeks ago for consideration. I know we've had a lot of conversations around that entire series of policies, so I put together those 4 options. And before we jump into any of the discussion this evening, I just wanted to share some of my recommendations that have gone into the construction of those 4 options so everybody's aware. First of all, one of the things that I would suggest is that we need to get down to 1 review of instructional materials process. Again, currently there are a couple different processes that we put in place in some of those random policies like 2520-01, 02, 03. If we could just get down to 1 process, I think that would be great. I would actually recommend that it be the committee review process language that it actually appears under option A. It would appear in policy 9130 because that's moving all of the review processes into the public complaints policy. In option B, we still currently have multiple challenge processes in there that would remain, so we would have to change policy 2520-02, which is the one that focuses on library media center materials. Option 3, same thing. We still have multiples in there, so we would have to make some changes in 2520-02. And then in option D, It would actually live in 2520, where we could combine all of those because we've actually pulled that review process out of 252002, which actually remains as one of those policy language pieces in that option. So that's recommendation number one, is somehow we get down to one review policy and one review process and have that be the committee review. Second thing, I do not believe we should be accepting any book donations, period. So that language appears in all of the different versions that we have. I know administratively, we need to do a comprehensive review of our library media center materials anyway, just to ensure that we're in compliance with the language in our policy referring to the library bill of rights. And those two caveats in there that are within the Bill of Rights that we want to make sure we're focusing in on, which we've heard from several board members as well, is to make sure that we have materials that are providing opposing sides of controversial issues so that young citizens may develop, under guidance, the practice of critical reading and thinking, and then to provide materials representative of the many religions, ethnic, and cultural groups and their contributions to our American heritage. So we do need to undergo that process and really dig into that here a little bit more as we jump into the beginning of this school year when our media specialists return. I will say that we did not order any new library books this year, partly as a cost-saving measure, but also to get clarity around our selection process with this series of policies and administrative guidelines. So once we settle this, that will guide that work of that group that's going to be digging into our entire collection and starting to make sure that we have all of our all of the clauses within the policy that we end up with covered. Number 3, I know on our agenda, this is actually item number 5, I believe, the Media Center Guidelines discussion. One of the things that we've been looking closely at and that I think we should consider is looking at our weeding guidelines and indicate that if a book has not been checked out in 5 years, that it would be removed from the collection. Currently, it's sitting at 7 years. There's been discussion amongst the group that's really been digging into those weeding guidelines here to consider whether it's 7 or 5. I would recommend 5. A couple reasons for that. Number one, just to again make things a little bit more visible and transparent, I actually think we need to pull those weeding guidelines into the administrative guidelines for policy 2520 so that it's more visible, because that will be published under the administrative guideline manual on our website so that it's very clear what that process will be. Currently, it's just within the MPS guidelines for print media is where it lives right now. I think we need to make that a little bit more formal and put that within the administrative guidelines. And again, that's one of the reasons we went with Neola, is because we have both the policy manual and that administrative guideline manual that are both public-facing documents that are very easy for us to see and interpret. Another reason that I would suggest we get to 5, many of the books that were included on the list of books that I reviewed this year have never been checked out of our media centers. There are quite a few that would be coming off the shelves if we went to 5 years. So that's another part of the recommendation there. And also, I just think if students don't have an interest in reading the current books in our collection, I think we need to start to weed those books out according to our guidelines and bring books in that do meet their interests. Especially at the high school level, we see a pretty drastic decline in the fiction circulation as opposed to the nonfiction circulation. Again, I think our media centers overall probably need a little bit more time to evolve as well. We want to make sure we're making effective use of that resource and that space here in our buildings. And I think a lot of that goes to, what is the purpose of that space? I know a couple of us sat in on the Board of Trustees interviews for the public library yesterday, and the candidates were all terrific and really came forward with a lot of good ideas, and a lot of what they shared and their ideas didn't even really revolve around books. It revolved around different tools that they could use, different resource materials and databases and digital media, even so far as to using tickets to get into the Holden Arboretum. Things that really are things that aren't on your traditional library or media center. So I think really as times continue to evolve, I think we need to evolve our media centers as well. So again, my recommendation as we jump into some of these conversations here is to be able to pull some of that language that we currently have in the MPS guidelines for print media, make that change for books that have not circulated in the last 7 years, make that standard and make it 5. And we start putting that in our administrative guidelines. And then finally, kind of the last thing, really it's probably the first thing as we're looking at all 4 of these sets of policy guidelines, options that we put in front of you, is I want to make sure that with every part of our instructional, supplemental, and library media center materials policies and administrative guidelines, that parental rights are valued and controls are in place for them to review the materials, to opt their child out of the use of those materials, and to request an alternative material for their student. No matter what we're talking about, whether it's an instructional material, a supplemental material, or a library media center material, we want that parental control. Some of the ideas that have been shared, which we've tried to capture from our board members in these 4 different options, are in there now, whether they're in policy or they're in administrative guidelines. All of those are covered now, and we want to make sure that those continue with all 3 sections of this series of policies that we're discussing. So I wanted to start with that just to kind of give everyone here tonight and watching on TV just kind of what it is that went into the creation of these 4 options that the board members have had. I know we made a couple of adjustments even as recently as yesterday. We put in a couple more administrative guideline pieces that again haven't really been finalized, but we've spent a lot of time again with legal counsel going through some of the language to make sure that what we have in place mirrors what our practices are or need to be, and to make sure that they are legally sound as well. And that's why we've kind of held off on some of the administrative guidelines because obviously a lot's going to depend on which option we go with here. But I wanted to throw that out to our board members so that they could see some of the language pieces there. Really, it's a lot of the language that we've seen in some of the other policy pieces previously that we're still recapturing and recrafting to put in place just within the administrative guideline manual, maybe instead of within the policy manual. But again, both of those will be public-facing documents that I think will serve our district very well here moving forward.
Thank you. Mr. Heath, could we open it up to talking about the options at this time?
Sure.
All right, so we're going to start our board policy discussion on our board policy options related to 2520. If anyone has any way they want to.
Madam President, if I may. First, I want to say thank you to Mr. Heath and his team. This was a lot of work to put together 4 different options and revise them too as we kind of looked through them and read through them. It's a lot of work and it's a lot to get your arms around, so I just want to say how appreciative I am of you working with your team to present all of these options to us. We really had sort of a mishmash of, Neola and some leftover, policy language to look at, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to kind of take a collective view of what we've got and to offer and what we can hopefully improve upon going forward. And so for me, I'll jump in and say that option A is definitely the standout option for me, and I would really like to for several reasons, which maybe we can get into in a minute, but that is the one I would like to move forward for a potential second reading at the July 11th meeting next week.
I had a question. Mr. Heath, if you could answer it, because you had said that you wanted to make sure that we have parental rights and control over all materials. So as I see, these different options, there is no control over classroom materials, which has been a area of contention among our public because of the K through 5 book collection that does include topics that a lot of people, take issue with. So will that be part of, can we work that into the system, the 2-tiered system, which I completely support, as long as we're not taking things away? I think adding 2 would be perfect.
Yeah, and I know we've been playing around with that classroom library piece. We put it in front of our union representatives in our last DMPSC meeting, and they're still in kind of the works of what the logistics might be for that. But one of the things that we included in the latest updates were that connection to Form 2520 F1, which is that rating supplemental instructional materials document. And this is one of the things that we want to make sure that we start to utilize a little bit more. This is something that our curriculum department worked pretty closely with legal counsel on, just to try and add another layer for us, which will allow teachers and building principals as a starting point to review the materials, whether it's a book that they're adding to their classroom library collection already, whether it's another supplemental material that they want to bring in from the outside that isn't currently on the district approved list. And it goes through 3 different criteria: the relationship of the material to the course of study, the uniqueness of the content and presentation, and then I think most importantly, the maturation and comprehension levels of the information and ideas presented. And based on that rubric and the scoring there, that would trigger additional eyes being put on that particular book, resource, website, whatever it may be, so that we can start to take a look at that. And again, based on those ratings, then, is administrator approval needed for this? There are some things that are very mundane, benign, that wouldn't be controversial at all. And based on that, the scoring of that rubric, it would be pretty easy to identify that. But if there's any question at all, going through this rubric process will allow us to really identify, okay, we need to send that through the building principal. And then if the building principal still has concerns, that's going to our curriculum councils to take a close look at. If curriculum council needs additional guidance, that's when they're coming to me then, and we make the final decision on whether or not we want to utilize that particular item. From the classroom library checkout process, that's something that we're still trying to get our arms wrapped around, to be perfectly honest, because right now everything in our library media centers are barcoded, scanned, we have all the information. That's not necessarily the case with every single classroom library book that we have especially at our elementary schools. So that's something that we've put in front of the union reps to start the process of looking at that, and hope to have a little bit more guidance on how that might look. Again, the nice thing about administrative guidelines are as soon as we have a process to address that, we can get that added and into the public-facing documents right away. And that'll be something that we'll continue to share as we get back here in August with our groups to start having some conversations around what the logistics of those classroom libraries will be.
Thank you. I think it's essential that we get some type of parental notification system in place for the elementary school classroom library collections that are, especially because their parents aren't seeing it. They don't know what their children are looking at during the day because it's for silent reading time. So a lot of the discord that I've heard from the community has been in relation to the elementary school level book collections and ensuring that, hey, if I don't want my child looking at these topics, which the board already approved that collection, with the 3-2 vote. So
Right.
It's in there. We just need another layer then so that parents have the right to say, not these,
I spent a little bit of time talking with some people in IT again today just about some of those topics. Number one, if we go with the tiered checkout system, how we start to gather that information, number one. And then number two is, what does the classroom library process look like? So if at all possible, we will try and get some of that digitized so that it's a little bit quicker and easier. But it may take a little bit of time. But hopefully we can get some logistics hammered out here pretty quickly in August.
I think we also have to remember to that point, putting safeguards into place and having parental rights, we are valuing parental rights. And that's why I was, really excited about the tiered system because I feel it is a nice midpoint for people. People that want more involvement can have that extra involvement if they choose to opt into giving their child permission every time they check out a book. And as you state, there are some opportunities in the classroom where they may have access to books that would be a bit of a loophole. And I think that we can problem solve around that. And I'd like to explore several ideas with that and also get input of teachers. And I think, maybe some of that could even just be letting parents say, I don't want my child to go from the classroom library and I'll provide my own materials. Because when I'm looking at the community survey, we had some pretty interesting data there. And we had 92% of respondents saying that they are very or somewhat well-informed of what's going on in the classroom. So they don't feel like things are being hidden from them. They also feel, 82% said our teaching staff is excellent and good and that they trust, the teaching staff, and 85% of parents believe that they have enough involvement. So with all of that, I'm not saying that we don't address concerns when people are concerned, but to make a system that may be cumbersome and take time away from teachers and their ability to teach, and that could be costly, I think we just have to weigh those options. So maybe there's a little bit of a midpoint with, okay, I don't want my child taking from this library, I'll send in my own materials, or they can use this library that I've pre-approved, but something that can make things easier for the teacher too, because they do have a lot on their plate, and I think they do an excellent job, and I think we can all trust them. So I don't want to recreate the wheel of a system that isn't broken. So I did hear that you were interested in moving option A forward.
Yes, do I need to make a motion for that, or I wasn't?
We're still discussing.
If you'd like to make a motion.
I think I would
but
like
we'll
to.
still discuss.
Yeah,
So
okay.
you're making a motion?
Yes,
Wait,
I'll make
Should
that
we
motion.
not
Go ahead
discuss
and-
all of them before we finalize
Oh,
that?
of course, yeah, go. but go
I'll
ahead.
motion to move option A forward for a second reading at the July 11th meeting.
Second
Wait,
meeting?
second reading?
Or, excuse me, July 11th meeting, next week,
No,
a second
for
reading.
the second reading? Is this
Yes.
being considered a first?
Yes.
Yep.
This is our first reading.
Don't we have to put it on the agenda?
For the public, and we didn't even list it on the agenda, the actual policy change.
Legal counsel advised that this could be a first reading. I
what I
read
figured.
the sunshine notice and the agenda to him, and he was comfortable with the language that was used.
Great. So we're comfortable with doing a first reading on important policies, and we're not putting it on the agenda for the public.
But it'll be on for next week, so people will have the opportunity to read it and comment on it next week.
And we are not voting tonight.
Right,
Just
I understand that, but we haven't even gone over some of the important parts of option A. And
Well, I think we're about to, is
Yeah,
what she was just
we're
saying.
gonna- Do I have a second to move option A forward?
Second?
Okay, so discussion on option A. And we can discuss all of the options too, is what, whoever, I'm not opposed to that, but let's just focus on option A now because we have interest to move that one forward. So discussion on option A.
One of the things I like about option A is that it returns to the Neola original policy. There are some benefits in terms of clarity and simplicity. Since that's the written policy that is shared by most districts that are Neola districts, they will be responsible for making sure that our updates are clear and timely. So if there's a change in legislation or something is impacting that policy, we don't have an ad hoc version of it or a blended version of it. Instead, it's their policy, and they can make recommendations in terms of the administrative guidelines or the content of the policy itself. So to me, the simplicity and clarity, and that it does cover the things that were of primary concern to us as we've had these many discussions over many months, that I think option A suffices to do a really good job of covering that and the very comprehensive administrative guidelines. And that also adds a level of fluidity that lets us respond to what that classroom checkout process, if that's going to be a checkout process, or there'll be some other kind of a form that Mr. Heath and the folks from MTA come to an agreement on, that can be rolled into the AG guidelines.
I completely agree, Mrs. Schessling. And that was my first reason is, being in line with Neola, that it's consistent, that it's something that's based on expert opinion and best practices. So that was all very appealing. It's definitely a more streamlined approach. It's going to keep us in check with any legal issues that we come up upon. And I also liked, though, that the sort of, as we get into the weeds with more specific instructions, the two-tiered policy, which we're now calling, which was formerly, I think we were calling it the stoplight policy, that's going to live in the place, in the administrative guidelines as opposed to in the policy. And that gives the board a little more flexibility. It gives the administrators a little more flexibility. If they want to go back and change things, they don't have to go back to the board to change the policy. So I kind of liked to have that, those details living in the administrative guidelines as opposed to the policy. The other reasons I really liked it, as I was looking at all of these different options, I asked myself two main questions. One, is it reasonable? And two, is it feasible? Because we have to, as Mrs. Cook, as President Cook was saying, we have to kind of think about how we execute some of these things in the classroom. And it's proven to be a little more complex, I think, than we had expected, though we probably should have expected it to be more complex. And so is it feasible? Do we have the resources? Do we have the staff to make these things work? And I do think that option A gives us that. Mrs. Cook also mentioned, data from our community survey, and I think that's really important to consider as well, that's fresh data that we just got from our community that consisted of parents as well as staff, employees, and the community, even folks who don't have students, kids in the schools. So I really think we need to take the results from that survey to heart when we're considering these options as well.
So I'll just add, policy option A removes the sexual content policy, which provides safeguards for parents against sexually explicit materials, such as books that we have in our library now that reference fathers graphically raping their children. So I am not for the removal of that policy. I think it's There's no better way of telling the community that we're okay with sexually explicit materials being in front of their children than to rid our policy and get rid of our policy. I think that's, if we do anything, it should be adding to what we currently have as layers and safeguards. I do not think this is a wise move to do that. And we could say that the 25% was only concerned with our books. Well, were the people who were surveyed asked specifically, are you okay with these topics? A lot of people don't know that we have sexually explicit materials being shown to 14-year-olds. So I would not be in support of removing that policy. I'm shocked that our board would support removing that policy. I think adding to is going to help create trust. I'm for the tiered system. To add to additional layers is always good as additional safeguards. But I think that is a very unwise decision to make, and I do not support that any way, shape, or form.
I think the elimination of that policy is important because for lots of reasons. For one, and I was not on the board when it was voted on. I would never have supported it in the first place. I think it's weak policy. It's not, and reasons for that are many. One, it's not consistent. It's unevenly applied to books throughout our entire collection. For example, and I'm quoting from the policy only applies to existing materials that are specifically challenged. The policy shall not apply to any state-mandated curriculum. You know, we have all of these little ifs, ands, or buts within that policy, making it not applicable in so many situations. So, you know, we're grandfathering some books in, and maybe not these, and not state texts, and so on and so on. That's not strong policy, and it's not defensible, moreover. And it blacklists certain books and authors, which opens us up to litigation and legal scrutiny, as I've mentioned in previous meetings, and it denies students the freedom to read, which, as we've heard from some members of the community in public comment, has been critical in some cases for students needing to identify, for example, with other victims of sexual assault. And finally, it conflicts with Policy 2520, which states that material cannot be removed, quote, solely because it presents ideas that may be unpopular or offensive to some. So for all of these reasons, it's weak policy and it doesn't belong on our books.
So I'll just let you know as well that we all did receive update from legal in regards to some of those things that you had just said. Legal scrutiny, it wouldn't fall under blacklisting because we're not listing books. It's a policy. It can be upheld, otherwise we wouldn't have had it approved. So those concerns are null. I also would let you know that, and speak to the whole board, I sat in Craig's office with a child and a mother who was sexually assaulted. And she said if her child was to read any of those books, it would set her years back in her counseling. That's harmful to children, even if it's just one child.
And that child and that parent specifically would be caught in this system that we're discussing, in which was described parent oversight being an absolute priority, and the trust that we have with teachers to work with families and students like that to ensure that they are protected and that those rights are respected.
I do not think it's worth the harm for that child. I think Rose had something to say.
I think it's a mischaracterization of our collections to imply that there's a wholesale selection of materials that would be problematic. We had 4 challenges, and we've been through those items at length, and those items were retained after the exhaustive review process. So in my mind, leaving the power to make all decisions on behalf of the student with the parent is not only sufficient, but is the right thing to do. It gives that parent the authority and the control that they believe is right for their child. And as Mrs. Marchaza has said, we've had lots of extended community responses on both sides of this, but there is definitely a concern, and this would fall under the Library Bill of Rights as well, to make sure that we're not falling into censorship. So in my mind, going to option A, letting parents have the control of their own children's reading materials, is that safeguard, and that was what was added. So that came after we even discussed any of the sexually explicit materials, because again, defining that. And there was the request for a list. So we didn't produce that, but that was what was wanted, was a list of those materials. That's where you would definitely get into concerns from publishers and authors that their works are being judged as inappropriate for young audiences. So I'm very comfortable with option A.
Okay, if I can chime in here. So I agree with Annie. I don't understand why we would go as far as trying to remove the sexual content policy. Because the two-tiered guidelines are great, but they're not foolproof. And I just feel like it's one extra layer to protect students, teachers, the district, and we know there's legislation right now that's in the works that can hold our staff accountable, and this is just, to me, is one extra layer. It doesn't hurt in any way. It sets a standard that we are extra careful. The two-tiered process is not just to weed out sexually content. It's we had parents speaking to the fact that my one child is triggered if they read something about thunderstorms or bugs or certain things upset them. So there's a lot that went into creating the two-tiered process. But to me it's one extra layer that I feel comfortable as a parent knowing that we have that. And for me, this is all for nothing if the classroom libraries are not worked into this, because that's where a lot of these books, especially some that fall under, I would say, controversial or just not debatable if it's age appropriate, are in the classrooms. And I'm fine with, I understand the reality is that teachers are busy and they have a lot of books in there. So perhaps we give them an option, is you either can go through whatever process Mr. Heath comes up with that finds a good way to keep track, or you have the option to just take out any of those books that you feel are don't align, that aren't neutral and fully balanced. And the other thing with this, with option A, this is also removing the option to, you said you were going to add this on, Mr. Heath, for donations. Is that correct?
Yeah, if we go option A, the one additional change that would need to be made is to Board Policy 7230, which is the gifts, grants, and bequests policy, where that line that appears in all of our policy stuff in option B, C, and D, we would just take that one line item that says no gifts or donations of library media material shall be accepted would be added to policy 7230 if option A is selected.
So before I comment on that, can I ask what prompted this need to not want donations?
Yeah, I'll be perfectly honest. We will have both extremes of the political spectrum wanting to then donate books to the library. If you look at the makeup of our board right now, what would end up happening is anything that potentially was left-leaning would probably be voted in. Anything that was right-leaning would not be voted in. I know what everybody's trying to do, but this isn't the way to do it. What we need to do administratively is go through our collections, take a look at our materials, and figure out how we can balance those. We're the education professionals. We can do that work, but we need to be able to do that work. By having the donation policy without accepting those donations, I think is the safest way to protect the library collections right now.
Mr. Heath, could I add to that? I would be in favor of adding that statement onto 7230, not because I don't want gifts for our school, but because I respect and appreciate the schooling that our librarians have gone through to curate a collection. And if we're looking at a collection as a whole, I think that it's important to not just grab things that maybe aren't books that have the same level of scrutiny that we would put anything else through that we're adding to our collection.
So let me just then make my comment. So I see what you're saying, but I also, what I hear is that we won't have balance because we don't have a balanced board, and so we're always only going to get one side in. So that, to me, that's a big problem. So, we sat at the table and argued back and forth, and ultimately we were outvoted. But to keep some books that were many people thought age inappropriate, and that didn't have anything to do with getting a good education, no academic value. And the argument that I heard from the three that voted was we have to have diversity of thought. And now, okay, we have to have balance. Our policy in it states that we have to, if we have one side, we have to have more than one. And now we're sitting here and it's like, I feel like the rules are being changed because now we're saying, okay, show us that balance. And we didn't have any balance, and that is why we're getting an influx of donations, because we're not complying with our own policy. So if, again, my say was that none of those books should have been in, but here we are, and I respect the vote, but now we have to comply with policy. So I'm okay with eventually getting rid of donations if I don't love that idea, but after we can show and prove that we have balance in our libraries, in our materials, and we don't, which is this whole work session came about. It got pretty emotional. We need a work session to battle out because the thought of some of the books that countered the statements in some of the books that were challenged. You know, if my kid's gonna read a book about that the world is dying because climate change is, destroying the earth, then they also better have the opportunity to read a book that says, well, you know what, actually, the Earth's temperature hasn't changed and yada, 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 because there is both sides. And so I can't support in any way getting rid of being able to receive donations. I think it's just wrong because it's our taxpayers have every right to offer donations. And, we accept every other kind of donation from the community, including from pizza parties to pencils and supplies, to field trips. So it seems like a little bit of a slap in the face to our taxpayers to say, you can't donate and you can't contribute to what our students are learning. And I think it's really unprofessional of us up at this table to say that we know already that if it's something that you don't agree with up here and you have a majority, you're not going to vote for it. You guys started it by accepting some of these controversial books, and so it's almost like you're changing the rules because the books that we want in, that some people want in, are not aligning with what you want. And Mr. Heath, we know that's true, and Mr. Heath just said it, that was the reason for wanting to move this, get rid of this part of the policy. So I probably will lose this battle, but I do not support that. And we have to, before we even move to figuring out some of these policies, we need to get to the business of fixing the fact that we're not compliant on our policy that says that we have balance, because we don't have balance right now.
I would disagree. I believe that we do have balance. Our exhaustive databases that we subscribe to for our secondary students take any controversial topic. Opposing viewpoints is one that's been around for a long time. You probably use that in college yourself. That opposing viewpoints, for example, would discuss something like climate change and would talk about pros and cons and different viewpoints and the nature of arguments on each side of that. When you have a curated collection, as opposing viewpoints would have, then you have a reasonable balance. It's very difficult as a media specialist, and remember, we don't have any elementary media specialists. We have one for the district, and she's doing a splendid job. When she's making selections, she's basing it on reviews, subject specialists. So for example, if she's making a purchase of a book on weather, for example, then that's going to be read, scrutinized by somebody who's a subject specialist in the sciences, so that the quality of the material coming in is not usurped by the well-meaning gift of somebody, whatever it might be. It would be impossible to manage your collection. You only have so much room on the shelves, and what's appropriate for any age level? Is it a publisher that's respected and so forth? That's a whole separate set of issues. So we would be more in alignment with what the public library does, for example, to make sure its collection is of high quality and is well balanced. So in terms of pros and cons, that is built in, and that's something we can all be comfortable with, knowing that our students, whenever they're doing research on any kind of a topic, that they're able to access that through our resources right online. You generally would not be buying a lot of things. Sometimes there's not even quality material that's published. So you're limited to what's available for purchase. Things go out of print because publishing is such a volatile industry. So things go out of print. You're often much more likely to depend on some ephemeral materials or databases that reference journal articles or other typical publications, especially in the sciences. So I think taking book donations out of it, otherwise somebody has to say yes to all of it. Yes, no, maybe, and I don't want to put that burden on anybody, and I don't think it would improve the quality of our curated collections. I think it's very important to respect the specific training and experience of our media specialist who is making all of that material available, and then the clerks at the other buildings can select what they believe their students need, or if they need to replace a copy of something, then that's also permitted. So I disagree.
Well, we asked, when, in March for balance, and
Yep.
some of these just specific books, and we didn't have any. So we don't have balance. And the argument you just made would have made sense as to why to keep some of those books that were challenged out, that some parents had issues with. So, you know, I disagree that there's not anything, that there's pretty much a book for every topic. We could find it if we need balance. So
I just
it
want to
seems
clarify,
hypocritical.
though, that I think any donated books that Mr. Heath has received are still sitting in your office and have not been introduced to the collection. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, our policy currently states that it would have to be a board vote, I believe, so we haven't had any come to us quite yet. I have a couple other
Before you
notes.
jump into that, Annie, and Rose, I know you said there are some specific topics that you guys would want to see. Yeah, if you can share those with us, and obviously this is going to be a lot of the work that we're going to be entertaining here at the beginning of this school year. You know, if there are topics that you're specifically looking for, if you can give us, you know, a list of those topics, those are the things, because I know some of the community members have sent us book titles as well. Those are things that I want to make sure that our committee's taking a look at to create this visual of balance in our collections as well. So, you know, if we're not going to have the book donation piece, which, you know, again, that's for the board to determine. Again, that's my recommendation right now. But I also want to make sure that everybody hears me very clearly that this is going to be one of those things. And people keep saying that we don't listen, but we have conversations over and over and over again, especially in the curriculum department right now, where we're looking at the different resources that are coming in, especially things that are new. And if there's anything that even remotely touches a controversial topic, we're questioning things and making sure that we're we're either pulling things off, we're pulling slides out of professional development pieces, we're having conversations with those individuals that are coming in to do the trainings with our teachers to say this is where we are in our community, and we need to make sure that we are balanced in the way we're approaching this. So I want to make sure that, again, we're hearing very closely what it is that we want to see within those topics so that we can start looking at those titles and making sure that we have balance, especially as we move forward, not only from the weeding process, which will be part of it, but from the curation process when we get that started again here, probably a year from now when we're starting to order more books for our media centers across the district.
I just want to, I hear what you're saying, Mr. Heath, and I did email you specifically before the book vote for the last Real Kids for Change, whatever that book challenge was that was voted to stay 3-2. And I had asked if we had any other opposing viewpoints for some of those topics, such as, that book very clearly stated you could be assigned the wrong sex at birth. So that's gender identity, and I had asked, and you didn't find anything at that point that would be the opposite viewpoint, to which I believe some members of the community then spoke up and tried to donate books that specifically state there are only 2 genders to kind of show that balance. A couple other questions and then comments. So Mrs. Jeschling, you said censorship in reference to the sexual content policy. I just wanted to clarify it's not censorship because we're not removing anything. I ideally would not like sexually explicit books at all in our school, especially referencing molestation, things like that. However, I respect the vote as well, and I think that when we did the sexual content policy, it was just to flag parents so that titles like Identical or The Bluest Eye that don't just jump out at you right away as being sexually explicit would just kind of give the parents a little extra guiding point. Our policy does state we need balance in reference to opposing viewpoints. So my question, Mr. Heath, would be, do you consider, these are some of the topics to which these have been challenged in elementary school level. Some of the topics have been, we retained a book about Colin Kaepernick talking about BLM in a positive way. So I don't know if you, would you consider BLM a controversial viewpoint or controversial issue needing an opposite viewpoint, as well as sexuality and gender identity? So if you could answer that would you consider those controversial, needing an opposite viewpoint per our policy?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, so I think that that's where some of the book donations come into play, and I'm with Rose. I don't like the idea of getting rid of book donations, but I would support it if we can prove that our current policy, that we're meeting and aligning with our current policy, having that balance. Also, the sexual content, actually, Mrs. Jeschling, you mentioned that the public library, that we align with the public library. We actually don't when it comes to sexually explicit materials, because if you remember with The Bluest Eye, the card that we give our students, they cannot use that card to go and check out that book. You would need a parent's signature for them to check out that book to get an upgraded card. So we're not aligned. I made that as a point when we had that book challenge. So I just wanted to
You know that
verify
book's
that.
available online in the public domain.
What does that have to?
The Bluest Eye. I
It's
mean,
like a red
you
herring. What
wouldn't
does that
need
have
to
to do with
borrow it through the library for that particular book. It's a Google.
There's a lot of books that are out there that are available to the public, but we have different standards. So I'm not saying we should go and make everything available
No,
to
but what I'm
students.
saying is we went through that process. We had the full committee's review of that particular book, and the decision and recommendation was made to retain it. Again, it's been on the shelf for 40 years. It's been checked out 7, maybe 8 times in that period of time. And again, looking at the survey results, I don't dismiss the value or importance of those who disagree, but it is by far a smaller proportion. Therefore, to have our policy steered toward meeting a false concern where the process we're putting in place with the tiered checkout system and giving parents the right to object to or limit or ask for replacements for any material, I feel like there is deep respect for anyone, for any reason, objects to any material that would be curricular, supplemental, or media center materials. And I think we've worked hard to try to accommodate those concerns in as transparent and careful a way as possible. But I don't think our policy needs to be different than what the other Neola districts follow. And should there be a change at the legislative level, then the Neola organization will adjust our policy and recommend those changes. So I feel like by sticking with that clear and simpler approach, we're less likely to get into the weeds with problems about how we enforce a policy or present a policy or create some unexpected side issue. The number of students who read fiction, as Mr. Heath mentioned, at the secondary level is minuscule. That's just a fact. So they're likely to use materials for research purposes. That's where our databases of magazine articles, opposing viewpoints, like I mentioned, and lots of other high-quality research tools, those are available for students, and that gives them that scope of viewpoints from one side all the way to the other, and helping students to make informed, critically thought through arguments of their own. And that is absolutely a big piece of what we do as educators. What our dreams and goals are for our students is to become well-informed, independent thinkers who can use their own critical judgment to come to conclusions. That's really a big part of the process, and as Mrs. Iapolo and I have learned through that guiding coalition process as we're working on our strategic plan for the next 5 years, we want to give kids lots of good information and high quality information. The other piece I wanted to mention in terms of collaborative classroom, when those books were presented 2.5 years ago now, then we looked at that in the lobby. I think there were 3 cards filled out. There certainly was not a wholesale response or reaction that was negative from the community, because the vast majority of books were great options. There were a couple that, for some folks, yes, maybe they had an objection, but we didn't hear that. And again, the survey would bear that out, is that there are legitimate concerns that any person could have, but I think we'd be going down the wrong road to let that dictate our policy when a clean, simple, straightforward policy with the tiered checkout system protects the interests of all in the most reasoned and fair-minded way, and is in alignment with the Library Bill of Rights for students.
Mrs. Jessling, I just want to expound on that a little bit, because I thought of something as you were talking about the survey results and the 25% of folks who say they are concerned about the books. I mean, just to sort of level set and kind of put things into perspective, look how much time we have devoted to talking about books and policies when we have 25% of our survey respondents who are telling us it's an issue. So that means 75%. So let's think about our priorities and how much time we're pouring into discussing this, where 75% of our survey respondents told us we have other priorities we want you to focus on. So what are we neglecting in favor of spending so much time? I'm not saying we shouldn't spend any time, but think about, just like for a second, reality check, how much time should we devote, and what are we neglecting or losing by by really, and to add to that, the number of kids who are checking these books out. So just let's think about that for a minute in terms of, we've talked about balance, but this is a different kind of balance perhaps in terms of the time we're spending on which priorities. And then the other thing I would add too is I just want to agree and reiterate the support for the committee and the media specialist who does cultivate this collection very carefully and in an informed way. I want to say that absolutely I trust that team. I want us all to trust that team. They've been trained to do so, and if we don't have the so-called political balance to do that, then all the more reason to trust that team that's been hired to do the job we've asked them to do.
I find it interesting. I want to address we keep hearing about the survey. I find it interesting that when I mentioned, and when I ran for school board, I was very, very open about my stance on books. And I knocked on, I don't know how, myself and my supporters knocked on thousands probably of doors or talked to thousands, reached thousands. And when I mentioned, to those people, I was very transparent about how I felt about books. And many, if not, I would say most, were not even aware it was a problem. They didn't even think it was legal for a school to have some of these books in. So when I mentioned the people do care about this issue, I got the most votes. That data, we turn our nose to that data. But all of a sudden, we take a survey with 2,000 people. We can't even confirm if they're actual men or residents. We've got, I think saying if we are going to use that data, okay, 500 people who are upset with this is worth it because our levy failed by 1,000. So who's to lose if we're spending time on this? I think we are, the district, because we're not going to pass the levy if we don't start listening to what they're saying. And you don't think it's important.
That's not what I said.
But
that's not what I said.
You're saying that 25% are not worth the time, and
that's
I
also
disagree.
not what I said, and I take issue with you claiming otherwise.
Can you repeat what you said?
I said that it's not an issue, but we should consider the amount of time we're pouring into the discussion of something that 25% of people say it's an issue and 75% say that it is not.
25% of people who took the survey say it's an issue. I got over 10,000 votes, and those people thought that was an issue. So, again, but here's to move forward. I think what's important, if you're agreeing, Craig, that you said we don't have balance currently, but we need it. I'm glad to hear that, and I will give you my titles and suggestions. Moving forward, I think and correct me if I'm wrong in this option, all of the, I guess you could say, power lies in the media specialist who's making these decisions. So how can we have more eyes on these selections and make recommendations, and and ultimately can the board finalize these selections before and have them posted for the public?
Yeah, we've already started that process too, because again, when we went through some of the fiscal crisis pieces back in '04, that reduced our media specialists considerably. Again, as Ms. Jessling pointed out, we have one full-time media specialist now. What we've implemented here over the last year, which again we would figure out where this would fit in the administrative guidelines once we finalize our policies, but we've gone through a process now where those book lists that she is pulling for us for consideration for purchase are sent to each of the individuals that are working in the media centers at the elementaries and middle schools as well. They look through that list, compare it to what their collection is, identify those books that they would need to add to their collection out of that list. So the first, it's going to be several different screening parts here. First is our full-time media specialist. Second is going to be those individuals that work in the media centers at each of the elementaries and middle schools. The principals at the elementaries and middle schools and at the high school are also reviewing all of those lists now to double check And if there are any things that kind of pop out as they're looking through those, they're highlighting those and are bringing those back to our administrative team at the district level. And then ultimately, those will land in my office for final approval. So those are, we've got probably 4, potentially 5 different levels now, where I think in the past we have had 1. So that's going to be something that will be built into what it is that we do. And I believe it's outlined in one of the administrative guidelines, if I remember correctly.
It is. I remember seeing it in there.
So we'll make sure that that's part of it, because, again, we knew that was an issue, and that's something that we addressed as we went through just our normal practices here this year. So that's been added in. But then ultimately, we made the decision just to not purchase any new materials at this point for a variety of reasons, including cost-saving measures, but also looking at, okay, let's finalize our policy and guidelines here first, and then we can start that process again here next year.
And I think too, something that we can't ignore now, we do the argument that nobody checks them out. I think we need to force our kids to get in the library and start taking books out. That's a huge problem that it's not going unnoticed.
I don't think that it is so much that they're not checking books out of the library. Remember the amount of required reading that students are dealing with. So they would have their English classes, their science classes. There's a lot of material that they're responsible for reading. So leisure reading per se is the part. You'll have some kids who love it and do, and then you have other kids who never do. You know, I don't know what your experiences were when you were a high school student. And as I love to read, and I've been a librarian for a whole chunk of my life, but I never checked out books from my school library, ever. You know, I went to the public library, got what I wanted, and so I don't think the movement of a fiction collection, which is entirely typical among lots of schools everywhere, and has been historically. I can promise you, my 3 sons never borrowed a book from their, it would be junior high and high school libraries during their time in Mentor schools. So when they're little kids, that's a whole different situation. So, but having some fiction for those kids who do like it, I've talked with Mrs. Ford, and you know, she has a nice small collection that's available for those kids who are regular readers, and that was true at the middle school as well. You've got a handful of enthusiastic kids who love to have a book in hand all the time. So,
and again, I think that's where data comes into this too, and we've got the collection and circulation numbers. Let's follow what the kids are telling us. You know, what are they interested in reading, and let's continue to find those types of titles to entice them to come to the media center and check those types of books out. Obviously, looking through a pretty extensive list here, you know, back in I think it was October, November timeframe. I can't remember when we went through that process of looking through all those, but quite a few of those books are things that had never been checked out. So the kids obviously are telling us something. So let's find something that they do want to read.
And maybe when we get rid of the cell phones in the classroom and in the whole building, wink, wink, they'll have nothing better to do but check out books in the library.
I'll just add a couple other things. The 25%, because that just keeps getting thrown around here, and 25% doesn't seem like a lot, but that's 1 out of 4. And I think when we look at prior levy results, not just the most recent one of it failing, the 2006 additional funds levy that only passed by 200 votes, that's a lot to lose if we decide to continue down the same path that we've been on. Also, Mrs. Jeschling, you mentioned that the Bluest Eye went to committee. It actually didn't. That was Mr. Heath that solely made that decision. I actually had suggested in previous board meetings that we take him out of it completely because he can't satisfy everybody and somebody's going to be mad at him one side or the other side. So I am okay with removing Mr. Heath from the book challenge process and having it go to committee. And I think historically, if we look at the elementary school book challenge that we received, one of them, which was the Colin Kaepernick one, I believe that vote was a 6-4. And so they did pull in some elementary school teachers as well. So even though it was approved in the committee and then put to the board for a final vote, I think that shows that not all teachers agree with some of the materials that are being put in their classrooms or on the shelves. So I am all for asking teachers their opinion as well. I hear a lot of, we have to trust the team. I don't think this is something we're not trusting the team. I think that thought process of, we have to appeal to authority is a fallacy, because I think we're all educated here, and we can say, hey, this elementary second grade book, like the one that was challenged, shows these controversial issues, and they're controversial in nature because of our policy that is about controversial issues, stating it has to have support or objection, strong support or objection, which I think we can all agree that was shown at the microphone at that board meeting. So I think, it's really important that I would like to see us balance our book collection first. I'd be happy to revisit the book donation removal in the future, but I would really like to show the community first that, hey, we've got this, we're only going to add additional layers to it and safeguards. I don't think removing anything at this point is very wise.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to move option A forward. And do we have any more discussion specifically about option A? Any questions about option A? Okay, if you could please call the roll for moving option A forward for a second reading for our July 11th meeting.
Who seconded that?
I believe it was Mrs. Jessling. Did you second?
Either first or second. It's been a little bit. I remember.
I think I was first, and then you
Okay,
second.
and that would be
yeah.
me then.
Yeah,
It's the
I
second.
just want to make sure I have it. I have it in my,
So we're moving option A. This motion is to move it forward, and you're not making any changes based on the discussion we just had. Do I understand that?
That's
correctly?
the motion.
Can you motion
That's the
to,
motion.
can we motion to amend option A?
I think we have to vote on this one first, don't we? If we have a motion on the table, wouldn't we have to vote on that first?
I think you can amend a motion.
I think we need
can
Mr. Wade.
We
I
can
didn't know,
amend it.
I wasn't even aware we were voting on anything.
can
Same,
amend
I
it.
feel
thought we were
very
just discussing and creating
100%.
what we're coming up
So
with.
this is only moving it to our next
I
meeting.
know, I
So we're
understand
not-
that. I didn't,
We're not
but I-
adopting it. We're
And then
just.
there's, right, time to
We'll
amend.
we'll again have time to discuss at the
Yeah.
next meeting, and we could amend and things there too. So if you don't feel ready for that tonight, we're not rushing
I mean,
that.
that's what, I
It's-
am ready for that tonight. That's what I came here for.
But if you want to amend something, yes, you could do that now as well.
So I would motion to amend option A to keep the sexual content policy, and then also to retain the book donation policy as well.
I second that.
Any discussion on
The
that?
sexual content policy and retain the book donation.
So the motion is to move option A forward, but include the addition of,
25-2003.
thank you, 2520.03, materials containing sexual content, and the book donation policy piece. Retain that in
I
option.
may have another one. My computer is not working, so forgive me for looking it up on my phone. But the portion of the classroom materials, making sure it applies to classroom materials, I don't know if we can add verbiage in there for that, but I would like to also do that to ensure that that the tier system applies to classroom materials.
So let's take a look at that. Now, this outlines very specifically how the classroom, how the tiered system works.
But that's not in the classroom, correct?
Right.
And
So the one thing with that, Annie, that would actually live in the administrative guideline for this, which doesn't actually need the board approval, but that would be something that we would, once we sort that out here, when we get everybody back in August, we can incorporate that into the updated administrative guideline to make sure
But you
that that gets
support, you do
included.
support that?
Yeah, I support trying to figure out what we're doing with the classroom library system. You know, whether that's, you know, okay, bring your own book, opt out of the classroom libraries. Are there ways to digitize the classroom libraries to have that fall under the same checkout procedures with the tiered system? So those are some options that we'll kind of debate, and I'll make sure and bring that forward to the board as we get some of that done. So I don't think we would need it in the amendment right now with option A because it would be part of the administrative guideline, but that'll be something that I've got in my notes here already to make sure that we follow up with.
okay, so do you need to, could you read that motion for us, or do you want me to state that again for you, Mr. Wade?
I have it as that Ms. Payne has a motion to retain the sexual content policy and retain book donations.
In option A.
Are we voting separately on those?
Yeah,
or
we could-
what
We
is-
just have an amendment, we're just voting on
The amendment.
adding this amendment into option A.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we have a second on that?
Yes.
Did you second that? Okay, Mrs. Iapolo seconded that. Any discussion on that amendment?
Just a request, Mr. Wade, I can't hear you. So, thank you.
And if anybody is thinking about, if you're stuck on the book donations thing, if we want to put something in there that, or maybe that's administrative guidelines that says, once we have balance, we can review it, or even that just says limited to once a year, that we will accept donations, and, you know.
For the reasons that I stated, I would not put book donations in. I'm absolutely fine with looking at, if you have a concern about a topic that doesn't seem to have coverage and you have a recommended title, I think that should be under the guise of our normal selection and collection development policy where we purchase the books. Otherwise, if someone donates a book, for example, and they've paid for this in good faith and it sits on the shelf, normal practice would be after 5 years it's gone. And I think that would become a problem. So I think we use
just put
our
that in
own
the
district funds,
disclaimer.
our own district staff, and if you have something that you'd like to suggest, and that could be brought in for consideration, and whether it's available, because that's another issue, as I mentioned before, with publishing being such a volatile industry. But I think we're just going to run into the same problem with folks, well-meaning, bringing us all kinds of things that they would like us to include in our collections.
Yeah, I think if we put the rules up front, if I'm donating a book, I'm okay with the fact that it might,
We've never taken them.
but it's irrelevant. The point is that we're not telling the community, we'll take your cash, we'll take your pizza parties, but we're not going to take your even consider a book donation. Like, we're not saying we have to take it, we're saying we'll consider it. I just think it's another, it's just, this is one of those things where we can reach across the aisle and do something that would please a large portion of the community, whether you want to agree that that's a large portion.
Can I just clarify one thing unrelated to books? We don't take every donation. I mean, there are things that people try to donate stuff to us all the time that we
Right,
don't
but they have the
want.
ability, we have a policy
So just to
to
be
let
clear,
them-
I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't bring out, there's people who try to donate things that they don't want any longer, that just, wouldn't make sense for the district to have. So I just want to be clear that the board understands that we don't accept every donation. So
And our policy
when-
doesn't say we do all books. It would go to a board approval.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we would have.
Right.
Okay,
That's
I just
what
want to
I-
be clear
Oh,
from
yeah.
a donation standpoint, though.
That's why it's silly that we're not even giving them the option. Like,
Yeah.
we're not saying we're guaranteeing it, but let's give the community the option. I think we owe them that.
I just want to say too, we've never had a work session where we've had a first reading where we weren't aware it was going to be a first reading. So in the future, I think we all need to agree and have full awareness of, if we're going to have a first reading and it's not just going to be a work session, I think that's really important for all of us.
Right. I agree, especially because I'm new and everything's new to me. I'd like as much time as I can to prepare.
Okay, is there any more discussion about the amendment on the table? All right, please call the roll.
Ms. Payne?
This is from the amendment that I made.
This is for your
This
amendment.
is for, yes. So we're, just to be clear, we're voting on the motion to retain the sexual content policy and retain book donations.
Yes.
Ms. Iapolo?
Yes.
Ms. Jessling?
No.
Ms. Marchaza?
No.
Ms. Cook?
No.
Motion fails 2-3.
Okay, so now if you could please call the roll on bringing option A as it stands forward.
So we are now voting on the motion to move option A to the July 11th meeting for a second reading. Ms. Marchaza?
Yes.
Ms. Jessling?
Yes.
Ms. Iapolo?
No.
Ms. Payne?
No.
Ms. Cook?
Yes.
Motion carries 3-2.
Is there any more discussion related to board policies, other options, any other questions that we can discuss?
Don't we have some more on here that we have to go through, or?
That's what I'm asking. Do you
okay.
want to bring any more forward that you'd like to discuss?
The only thing I'll just share with the board then, based on option A moving forward, the one additional adjustment would be for board policy 7230 to be moved forward as well. So we'll have, and I'll try and put these together. I know we're on a holiday weekend here, but I'll try and get these out to you guys here tomorrow or Friday at the latest. I know I already sent my board update for the week, but I'll do a separate board policy language piece for you. So we will have policy 2520, we will have policy 9130, and policy 7230 that will all then be part of that second reading and approval. Additionally, I will make sure, and I'll clean up the documents that you guys all currently have, because I know option A has 18 pages right now. So I'll clean it up so it's just the language that would appear in the policy manuals, so you can definitely read through that. The additional items that I'll provide then will be the possible language for the administrative guideline manual that, again, doesn't need board approval, but I want to make sure that you're looking at those policies and those guidelines in tandem. So I'll have administrative guidelines for 2520. I will have that for 9130. And if I don't think I pulled anything from 7230 yet. Bill, that may actually be under your series of administrative guidelines, so we'll take a look at that one on early on Monday then, maybe during our team meeting to double check that one. But I'll try and provide that to you here ASAP so you know exactly what, so everyone knows exactly what it is that we're looking at here for next Thursday's meeting. So you have that ahead of time. Instead of waiting for the board meeting agenda to come out.
Okay. I had
Thank you
another.
for that clarification. Is there
sorry.
another one option you want to discuss?
Yeah, so I just want clarification. So policy 9700, relations with special interest groups. This policy is the one that was shared with the middle school and high school administrative team in reference to connections with the GLSEN. And I remember having discussions, Mr. Heath, about the Pride Alley signs and all the signs, the flags and things like that that refer to GLSEN, and that you said does violate our policy. So I wanted an update on where are we with those flags and things that reference GLSEN. I know that we've had some emails even from teachers about issues with that website, because if you go there and it directs children to go there, it says click here and 3 times and it'll delete your history. So that's also not being transparent to parents. So
Mrs. Payne, for the benefit of the crowd and everyone, can you just, what is GLSEN, the acronym?
I
Or
don't know
does somebody
the
have
exact-
a
it's,
Google handy, just for the crowd?
I could look it up. I don't want to say it
Thank you,
wrong.
Bill. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we did share that out with
I have it here.
our high school.
9700 is the policy.
We did share that policy out with, especially our middle school and high school administrators, and they were, this was towards the end of the school year here, and they were going to be going through their buildings to see if there are GLSEN references on any of the postings, flags, whatever it is that they had.
So those have to be removed because they're not in compliance with our policy, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
To
And the
clarify, so those are things that specifically have GLSEN labeled on them? Is that
Correct.
what we're referring to? While you're looking that up, can I just ask a point of clarification on that policy? What,
You said
what,
9170.
Yeah.
what qualifies it as like a, is it worded as an outside agency or a, how is the wording there?
Yeah, and straight from the policy itself, it talks about political interest. It says all materials or activities proposed by outside political sources for student or staff use or participation shall be reviewed by the superintendent and/or principal on the basis of their educational contribution to part or all of the school program and benefit to students, and no such approval shall have the primary purpose of advancing the special interest of the proposing group.
So the wording is outside political sources, and how do we define an outside, how do we define it? How does a group get defined as an outside political source? Is it funding or how they register? Do we
The
know?
first part of the policy reads, "It is the policy of the Board of Education that student staff members in district facilities not be used for promoting the interests of any non-school agency or organization, public or private, without the approval of the board or its designee, and any such approval granted for whatever cause or group shall not be construed as an endorsement of said cause or group by this board."
The
So a
GLSEN,
non-school-
oh, sorry, the GLSEN, I just wanted to follow up. It's Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Educator Network.
Thank you.
So, and
Gay, lesbian,
Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network is what
Education
it's-
Network.
Yeah. And I know we had a day of silence as well that was associated with GLSEN. Is that going to be allowed next year as well? Are we opening ourselves up by doing that to anybody who wants to promote a day of silence for persecution of any kind or whatnot? Because I had questions that I received about that. You're allowing this, so what about a day for this?
Yeah, and anything that would be associated with an outside interest organization would not be done. The recommendation, if they want to continue a day of silence, is they do something on their own with the school organization, not anything that's associated with an outside organization.
So we wouldn't allow the day of silence, or we would as long as we take out GLSEN from it?
Yeah, we would allow it if it's not associated with an outside group.
Okay, so that would open us up to other affiliations and other people who want to do a day of silence as well. Okay, just
and
wanted
is
to clarify.
that with board approval?
In this situation, it
So
just
like the
says
day of
that,
silence, if we did a GLSEN day of silence with board approval, or another day of silence with board approval, or,
Like if
yeah, I
it
don't
com-
think it needs board approval.
Right, I was just going to say, because if it comes from a student group, because this came from the Pride Club, right? This, if I'm understanding it correctly, it originated from the Pride Club. Pride Club had been partnering with GLSEN for how many years? I mean, a good number of years on this, and so as long as they sever the connection with GLSEN, the Pride Club can still, just I'm making sure I understand, can still host their day of silence. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
And are we allowing educators to promote it like they did last year with the day of silence? Because that actually came from a teacher to other staff members in the building, and I think that's where it goes against our policy as well, the promotion of it.
If it's associated with a school group, then it would be allowable.
Okay, so any of our groups that we may have can go ahead and have a day of silence if they'd like. Okay.
as long as they're not associated with an outside political source?
Correct.
Okay. And an outside political source is defined as?
Whatever I read here earlier.
Quiz.
They're not school-related.
Not school
They're not
related.
affiliated with the schools.
Yeah.
It's not a school-sponsored affiliation.
Non-school agency or organization, public or private.
Okay, thank you. All right. I just want to make sure no one wants to talk about option B, C, or D. No questions on that. We're only moving A forward.
Can we move more than one forward? That
Well,
wouldn't make
it's just
sense, right?
if you want to discuss them, I don't want to cut everyone off. We discussed A at large for a long time, so.
I mean, I think they all have, I think it would, I don't feel the need to go through every single option. I think I made my points clear as to what I support, what I don't support. Obviously, it's going to fall under the vote and support of the board. I'm probably going to be the minority, but that's okay. It is what it is. So I don't feel the need to go through the rest of the options.
Okay, you're not interested in the rest of the options? No one else? Okay.
The
All right.
weeding out, the other than the 5 to 7 days to 5, that's the only change in there?
That's the only change right now that I think we would kind of really focus in on. Again, those I will try and work into the administrative guidelines for 2520. So I'll pull all of that language into that administrative guideline. And then, yeah, again, with those, if there's something that we feel needs to shift during the course of the school year, that's something we can do on the fly and you know, obviously doesn't need board approval, but I would put that before the board in a board update saying, hey, this is what we're going to be adding to this particular administrative guideline. And then as we go through the publication process with that manual, we'll get those guidelines updated again in a very timely fashion then too. So if there, as you're reading through, because I think I supplied that in that long list of options, I think I included that document in there, the MPS guidelines for print media. If there's something in there that jumps out at you that you want us to consider, please let me know.
As a follow-up to the balanced library, I heard you request topics that, if anyone feels that there are topics that are unrepresented in our school library that we should be forwarding. So it's not necessarily titles, like I want this book, but more like I don't feel that this topic is represented in our school libraries and maybe at what grade level to forward them to you.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I've got a couple of them jotted down here that we've discussed, and I know, Annie, you've shared some things with me in the past as well. I just want to make sure as we get into those conversations with our committee here in August that we're making sure we consider everything that our board feels is important.
And then the intention of that would be that our librarians could look and see if that is a valid claim that we don't have balance in that area, and that it would be something that, you know, that would be sought after. Then
Correct.
we would be looking to fill in.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sticky.
Sticky.
I was just saying it's hot.
That's all. It is, it is.
It's like sticky.
Any other policies that we want to discuss? Any other discussion related to our agenda today? All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
Second.
Please call the roll.
Ms. Payne,
Yes.
Ms. Marchaza,
Yes.
Ms. Iapolo,
Yes.
Ms. Jessling,
Yes.
Ms. Cook.
Yes.
Meeting is adjourned at 7:18 PM.